When Navy SEAL Commander Marcus Thompson watched his 6-year-old daughter Emma struggle to tie her shoes for the 100th time, he felt a pain deeper than any battlefield wound. The doctors had labeled her learning disabled and developmentally delayed. Teachers whispered about special schools and lowered expectations. For 2 years, this decorated warrior who had conquered enemy territories found himself helpless watching his bright-eyed daughter fade into silence and self-doubt. But sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. When rookie nurse Sarah Martinez walked into Emma's life, she carried with her a secret weapon that no one saw coming: military precision training methods that would challenge everything everyone believed about Emma's limitations. What happened next would not only transform one little girl's future, but revolutionize how we understand the untapped potential lying dormant in children labeled as different. This is the true story of how unconventional thinking, military discipline, and one person's refusal to accept defeat turned a child's greatest weakness into her most powerful strength. Marcus Thompson stood in the doorway of Riverside Elementary School, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as he watched other parents collect their children with easy smiles and casual conversations. His jaw tightened as he prepared for another difficult pickup, another day of watching his daughter Emma emerge from school with slumped shoulders and tear-stained cheeks. The Navy SEAL commander had faced insurgents in Afghanistan, navigated treacherous waters in hostile territories, and led men through life-and-death situations without flinching. Yet nothing had prepared him for the helplessness he felt watching his 6-year-old daughter struggle with what seemed like simple tasks that other children mastered effortlessly. Emma appeared at the school entrance, her small backpack dragging behind her like a weight too heavy to bear. Her blonde hair, so much like her mother's, fell across her face as she approached with hesitant steps. Marcus knelt down to her level, forcing his expression into what he hoped was an encouraging smile. "How was school today, sweetheart?" he asked, though her red-rimmed eyes already provided the answer. Emma's lower lip trembled. "I couldn't read the words again, Daddy. Mrs. Peterson says I need to try harder, but I am trying really hard." Her voice cracked with the weight of repeated failure, and Marcus felt his heart break a little more. The drive home was quiet except for Emma's occasional sniffles. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror at his daughter, who stared out the window with the resigned expression of someone far older than her 6 years. The doctors had delivered their verdict months ago with clinical detachment. Developmental delays, they had said. Learning disabilities. Below average cognitive function. Each label felt like another door slamming shut on his daughter's future. At home, their modest house near the naval base felt heavy with unspoken frustration. Marcus's wife, Lieutenant Commander Diana Thompson, was deployed overseas, leaving him to navigate Emma's struggles alone. The irony wasn't lost on him that he could coordinate complex military operations across multiple time zones, yet felt completely outmaneuvered by first-grade homework. Emma sat at the kitchen table, staring at a worksheet filled with simple addition problems. What should have taken 10 minutes had stretched into an hour of tears and eraser marks. The numbers seemed to dance before her eyes, refusing to stay in their proper places. She would count on her fingers, arrive at an answer, then second-guess herself and start over. 5 plus 3, she whispered to herself, holding up her small fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then 3 more, 6, 7, 8. She wrote down the number 8 with careful concentration, then immediately erased it. "No, that's not right. Mrs. Peterson says I always get it wrong." Marcus watched from the kitchen counter, where he was preparing dinner, his hands clenching around the carrot he was chopping. Every instinct told him to intervene, to somehow make this easier for her, but the educational specialists had warned against enabling behaviors. They insisted Emma needed to develop independence, even if it meant struggling through tears. The evening routine had become a battlefield of its own. Reading time, once a cherished activity they shared, now brought anxiety for both father and daughter. Emma would stumble over words she had read correctly the day before, her confidence crumbling with each mistake. Simple sentences became insurmountable obstacles, and bedtime stories transformed into exercises in frustration. The cat sat on the... Emma paused, squinting at the page with intense concentration. The word mat might as well have been written in a foreign language. She had read it successfully just yesterday, but tonight it was a complete mystery. "Take your time," Marcus said gently, though inside he was fighting his own battle against helplessness. His training had taught him that every problem had a solution, that with enough analysis and determination any objective could be achieved. Yet here was his beloved daughter, struggling with basic concepts that seemed beyond her reach, and all his military expertise felt useless. The school meetings were particularly brutal. Marcus would sit across from teams of educators and specialists, his dress uniform traded for civilian clothes, as they discussed Emma's deficits and interventions. The language felt foreign and cold, reducing his vibrant daughter to a collection of test scores. Emma's processing speed is significantly below average. Dr. Figstery, Patricia Morrison, the school psychologist, had explained during their most recent meeting. She shows signs of auditory processing disorder, possible dyslexia, and attention difficulties. We're recommending she repeat first grade and receive special education services. The words hit Marcus like shrapnel. He thought of his daughter's imagination, how she could create elaborate stories with her toys, how she remembered every detail about marine animals from their trips to the aquarium, how she could solve complex puzzles that challenged adults. Yet none of that seemed to matter in the world of academic assessments and standardized expectations. Mrs. Peterson, Emma's teacher, meant well, but her patience was wearing thin. "I've been teaching for 15 years, she had confided to Marcus after class one day. "Some children just aren't cut out for traditional academic success. Emma might be happier in a more specialized environment where the expectations are adjusted to her abilities." The suggestion felt like a surrender, and Marcus Thompson had never surrendered anything in his life. But what could he do? The experts had spoken, the tests had been administered, and the evidence seemed overwhelming. Emma was failing by every conventional measure, and traditional interventions weren't working. At night, after Emma had finally fallen asleep, Marcus would sit in his study, surrounded by military manuals and operational plans that seemed meaningless compared to his daughter's struggles. Dead. He researched learning disabilities until his eyes burned, read every article and study he could find, searching for something the professionals had missed. But the message was consistent. Children like Emma had limitations that couldn't be overcome, only managed. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in early October. Emma had spent 3 hours on homework that should have taken 30 minutes, and she was exhausted. As Marcus helped her put away her books, she looked up at him with eyes that had lost their spark. "Daddy," she said in a small voice, "am I stupid?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Here was his brilliant, creative, loving daughter, reduced to questioning her own worth because she couldn't fit into an educational system that measured intelligence by a narrow set of criteria. "You are not stupid, Emma," he said firmly, pulling her close. "You're one of the smartest people I know. Sometimes the world just hasn't figured out how to see what makes you special." But even as he said the words, Marcus felt the weight of their situation pressing down on him. Love and encouragement weren't enough to help Emma succeed in school, and he was running out of options. The specialists were talking about medication, about accepting limitations, about preparing for a future of modified expectations and special accommodations. That night, as he tucked Emma into bed, she asked him to tell her about his work. Marcus found himself describing the precision and teamwork required in military operations, how every person had unique strengths that contributed to mission success, how problems were solved through creative thinking and refusing to accept defeat. "In the military," he told her, "we have a saying, improvise, adapt, overcome. It means that when one way doesn't work, you find another way. You never give up, because there's always a solution if you're willing to think differently." Emma's eyes brightened for the first time in weeks. "Could we try a different way for school, Daddy?" The question planted a seed that would change everything. As Marcus sat alone after Emma fell asleep, he began to think about the disconnect between his daughter's obvious intelligence and her academic performance. In the military, when standard protocols failed, operators were trained to think outside conventional parameters. They identified individual strengths, adapted strategies to unique situations, and never accepted failure as permanent. What if Emma wasn't the problem? What if the approach was wrong? The idea felt like a revelation and a challenge. Marcus had spent years training soldiers to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles by leveraging their individual strengths and finding unconventional solutions. Why couldn't the same principles apply to helping his daughter learn? But implementing such an approach would require expertise he didn't possess. He needed someone who understood both the flexibility of military methodology and the intricacies of childhood development. He needed someone willing to think beyond traditional educational boundaries and see potential where others saw limitations. Marcus didn't know it yet, but that person was about to enter their lives in the most unexpected way. Sometimes the solutions we need most come from directions we never thought to look, and sometimes the people who change our world arrive when we least expect them but need them most. The foundation was being laid for a transformation that would challenge everything everyone believed about Emma's capabilities. But first, Marcus had to find someone willing to join him in reimagining what was possible for a little girl who had been written off by the system designed to help her succeed. Sara Martinez never intended to change anyone's life when she accepted the position as a pediatric nurse at the Naval Medical Center. Fresh out of nursing school with barely 6 months of experience, she was the rookie everyone expected to make mistakes and learn through trial and error. Her colleagues saw her military background as irrelevant to healthcare, a quirky footnote to her professional qualifications rather than a valuable asset. But Sarah carried something unique with her into those sterile hospital corridors. Before pursuing nursing, she had served 4 years as a military training specialist, developing programs that transformed struggling recruits into competent soldiers. She understood how to identify individual learning patterns, adapt instructional methods to different cognitive styles, and build confidence through systematic skill development. What she didn't yet realize was how desperately those skills were needed beyond the military context. The meeting between Sarah and Marcus happened by accident, the kind of coincidence that seems insignificant at the time, but changes everything in retrospect. Emma had developed a persistent ear infection that wasn't responding to standard treatment, requiring a visit to the medical center. Marcus sat in the waiting room, watching his daughter fidget nervously with a picture book she couldn't read. When Sarah emerged from the treatment area, "Emma Thompson," she called, consulting her chart with the efficiency that marked all her actions. As they walked to the examination room, Sarah noticed Emma's reluctance to make eye contact and her father's protective hovering. During the routine check-in, she observed something that her colleagues might have missed. When asked to identify which ear was hurting, Emma consistently pointed to the wrong ear. But when asked to show rather than tell, she immediately touched the correct location. "Interesting," Sarah murmured, making notes that went beyond standard medical observations. Marcus caught the comment. "What's interesting?" Sarah hesitated, aware that she was venturing beyond her medical role. "Your daughter seems to process information differently than most children. She understands concepts clearly but struggles with certain types of communication." The observation opened a floodgate of frustration that Marcus had been holding back for months. Before he could stop himself, he was telling this stranger about Emma's academic struggles, the failed interventions, the expert opinions that offered little hope. Sarah listened with the focused attention that was part of her military training, asking clarifying questions that revealed a depth of understanding that surprised Marcus. "I've seen similar patterns before," Sarah said carefully. "Not in medical settings, but in military training environments. Some of our most successful soldiers started as recruits who couldn't learn through conventional methods." Marcus leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What do you mean?" Sarah glanced at Emma, who was now absorbed in arranging tongue depressors in precise geometric patterns while she waited. The child's ability to create complex designs while struggling with simple addition problems confirmed Sarah's growing suspicion that they were dealing with a learning difference, not a learning disability. "In the military, we learned that intelligence comes in many forms," Sarah explained. "Some recruits couldn't memorize procedures from textbooks but could master complex equipment through hands-on experience. Others struggled with written instructions but excelled when information was presented visually or kinesthetically. The key was finding the right approach for each individual." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a spark of hope he hadn't experienced in months. "Are you saying Emma might just need different teaching methods?" "I'm saying that what you're describing doesn't sound like cognitive limitations. It sounds like a mismatch between her learning style and the instructional approach she's receiving." The conversation continued after Emma's medical treatment was complete. Sarah found herself walking Marcus and Emma to the parking lot, reluctant to end a discussion that felt more important than her usual patient interactions. Emma skipped ahead, her ear infection forgotten in the excitement of playing with the colorful bandages Sarah had given her. "Could I ask you something?" Marcus said as they reached his car. "Would you be willing to observe Emma in a learning situation? Not as a nurse, but as someone with training experience." Sarah's practical side told her to decline politely and maintain professional boundaries. Her training schedule was already demanding. She was still adjusting to her new career, and getting involved with patients outside the medical context wasn't advisable. But something about Emma's situation resonated with her on a deeper level. "I'd need to be clear that I'm not a licensed educator or therapist," Sarah said. "But if you think it might help, I could observe and share some insights from my military training background." The first informal session took place the following Saturday at the Thompson home. Sarah arrived expecting to spend an hour observing Emma's study habits and perhaps offering a few suggestions. Instead, she found herself witnessing something that challenged her assumptions about childhood learning difficulties. Emma sat at the kitchen table with her homework spread before her, the same addition worksheet that had caused tears the previous week. Sarah watched as the child approached each problem with intense concentration, using her fingers to count, arriving at correct answers, then erasing them and starting over. "Why did you erase that?" Sarah asked gently after Emma had correctly solved 7 plus 4, but then rubbed out her answer. Emma looked up with eyes full of confusion. "Because it's probably wrong. I always get them wrong." Sarah realized she was witnessing the devastating impact of repeated failure on a child's confidence. Emma had learned to distrust her own abilities, second-guessing correct answers, because she had been told so often that she was wrong. "Let's try something different," Sarah suggested. She cleared the worksheet away and pulled out a small bag of colorful blocks she had brought from the medical center's pediatric playroom. "Can you show me what 7 plus 4 looks like with these?" Emma's face brightened immediately. She arranged 7 blue blocks in a neat line, then added 4 red blocks. "It's 11, she said with certainty, her voice stronger than Marcus had heard in weeks. "That's exactly right," Sarah confirmed. "Now, what if we write that down?" She guided Emma through recording the answer, connecting the physical manipulation to the written symbols. For the next hour, Sarah worked with Emma using techniques adapted from military training protocols. She broke complex tasks into smaller components, provided multiple sensory inputs, and built confidence through progressive success. Most importantly, she focused on Emma's strengths rather than her deficits. Marcus watched from the kitchen counter, amazed by the transformation in his daughter. Emma was engaged, curious, and successful. The tears were gone, replaced by excitement and growing confidence. This was the bright, capable child he knew existed beneath the layers of educational labels and lowered expectations. "How did you know to do that?" Marcus asked after Emma had run off to play, her homework completed successfully for the first time in months. Sarah considered the question carefully. "In military training, we start with the assumption that everyone can succeed if we find the right approach. When a recruit struggles with standard procedures, we don't conclude they're incapable. We adapt our methods until we find what works for that individual." The conversation that followed would establish the foundation of an unlikely partnership. Marcus, with his operational planning skills and fierce determination to help his daughter succeed. Sarah, with her training expertise and fresh perspective on learning differences. Both united by a refusal to accept that Emma's struggles represented permanent limitations.
"I have an idea," Marcus said as Sarah prepared to leave.
"What if we approached Emma's learning challenges like a military operation? Assess the situation objectively, identify available resources, develop adaptive strategies, and measure progress systematically." Sarah felt the familiar rush of excitement that came with tackling a worthy challenge. We'd need to be strategic about it, understand her specific learning profile, design interventions that leverage her strengths, and build skills progressively. They agreed to meet weekly, combining Marcus's parental insights with Sarah's training methodology. Neither of them fully understood the significance of what they were beginning, but both sensed they were onto something important. Emma's response to the new approach was immediate and dramatic. Within 2 weeks, she was completing homework with minimal frustration. Math problems that had previously caused meltdowns became puzzles to solve. Reading, while still challenging, was no longer a source of tears and self-doubt. The changes didn't go unnoticed at school. "Mrs. Bed," Peterson remarked on Emma's improved attitude and participation. The child who had been withdrawn and anxious was beginning to raise her hand in class, volunteer answers, and engage with classmates during group activities. But the most significant change was in Emma herself. The spark that had been dimming was returning to her eyes. She began talking about what she had learned in school rather than what had gone wrong. Bedtime stories became collaborative adventures rather than exercises in frustration. The little girl who had asked if she was stupid was beginning to believe in her own capabilities again. Sarah found herself looking forward to their Saturday sessions with anticipation that surprised her. Working with Emma was different from anything she had experienced in her medical or military careers. There was something profoundly satisfying about watching a child discover her own potential, about seeing confidence grow from small successes that built into larger achievements. Marcus documented everything with military precision. He tracked Emma's progress across different subjects, noted which techniques produced the best results, and identified patterns in her learning preferences. What emerged was a clear picture of a highly intelligent child whose cognitive style simply didn't match conventional educational approaches. The collaboration between a Navy SEAL commander and a rookie nurse might have seemed unlikely to outside observers, but it was producing results that traditional interventions had failed to achieve. They were proving that when adults refused to accept limitations and work together creatively, children could exceed every expectation placed upon them. However, their success was about to face its greatest test. The school system had its own ideas about Emma's educational future, and challenging institutional wisdom would require more courage and determination than either Marcus or Sarah had yet displayed. The stakes were about to get much higher, and their unconventional approach would need to prove itself against the full weight of professional expertise and bureaucratic resistance. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while Marcus was reviewing operational reports at his office on the naval base. Mrs. Peterson's voice carried an urgency that immediately put him on high alert, though her words were carefully measured and professional. "Mr. Thompson, we need to schedule a meeting as soon as possible. There have been some concerning developments with Emma's academic performance that require immediate attention." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Emma had been thriving under Sarah's guidance for nearly 2 months. Her confidence had blossomed, her homework was completed without tears, and she was actually excited about school for the first time since kindergarten. What could possibly be concerning about that progress? "What kind of developments?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the direction this conversation was heading. "Emma has been displaying some unusual behaviors that suggest she may not be receiving appropriate educational support. Dr. Morrison and I believe it's time to implement the individualized education plan we discussed earlier. Emma needs to be placed in our special education program immediately." The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon in the school's conference room, the same sterile space where Emma's limitations had been catalogued and her future had been predetermined by well-meaning professionals. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, his military training demanding punctuality even when facing battles he wasn't sure he could win. Morrison was already seated at the head of the table, surrounded by files and assessment reports that formed a paper fortress of evidence against Emma's capabilities. Mrs. Peterson sat to her right, accompanied by the special education coordinator, the school counselor, and the assistant principal. The formation felt distinctly adversarial, though Marcus was certain these individuals believed they were acting in Emma's best interests. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Thompson," Dr. Morrison began with professional warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "We're concerned about Emma's recent behavior patterns, which suggest she may be under inappropriate academic pressure." Marcus settled into his chair with the controlled composure that had served him in countless high-stakes briefings. "I'm not sure I understand. Emma has been more engaged with schoolwork than she's ever been. Her confidence is improving, and she's actually enjoying learning." Mrs. Peterson leaned forward, her expression earnest but troubling. "That's exactly what concerns us. Emma has been attempting assignments that are clearly beyond her cognitive abilities. Yesterday, she tried to complete multiplication problems during math centers. She's been reading chapter books during independent reading time. These behaviors suggest she's being pushed beyond her developmental level." The irony was staggering. Emma's success was being interpreted as evidence of a problem rather than progress. Marcus felt the familiar surge of combat readiness that had sustained him through his most challenging military operations. "What if she's actually capable of more than your assessments indicated?" Marcus asked carefully. "Doctor," Morrison consulted her files with the gravity of a judge reviewing criminal evidence. "Mr. Thompson, I understand your desire to see the best in your daughter, but our comprehensive evaluations paint a clear picture. Emma's cognitive processing speed places her in the bottom 5th percentile for her age group. Her working memory deficits significantly impact her ability to retain and manipulate information. These aren't limitations that can be overcome through wishful thinking or inappropriate pressure." The special education coordinator, Mrs. Armour Williams, joined the conversation with practiced sympathy. "We see this frequently with parents who struggle to accept their child's learning differences. The most loving thing you can do for Emma is to ensure she receives appropriate support in an environment where she can succeed at her actual level." Marcus thought about Sarah's observations, the careful documentation they had maintained, the joy in Emma's eyes when she solved complex puzzles that supposedly exceeded her abilities. The disconnect between what these professionals claimed to know about his daughter and what he witnessed daily at home was profound and troubling. "I'd like to request additional assessment," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded respect in military circles. "I believe Emma's previous testing may not have accurately captured her capabilities." Dr. Morrison's smile was patient but dismissive. "Mr. Thompson, we've conducted extensive evaluations using the most current assessment tools available. Adding more testing would only confirm what we already know, and potentially cause Emma additional stress." The meeting continued for another hour, with Marcus finding himself increasingly isolated against a wall of professional consensus. Every point he raised was countered with references to research, best practices, and Emma's documented limitations. The team was unified in their recommendation: immediate placement in special education classes with significantly reduced academic expectations. As Marcus drove home from the meeting, he felt the familiar weight of an impossible mission. In military operations, he had faced overwhelming odds before, but there had always been clear objectives and measurable outcomes. This battle felt more complex, fought on terrain where traditional tactics might not apply. Emma was waiting for him when he arrived home, her backpack already open on the kitchen table and her homework laid out with the organized approach Sarah had taught her. She looked up with bright eyes and a smile that could have powered the entire naval base. "Daddy, look! I finished my math and started reading the next chapter in my book." Sarah said if I keep practicing, I might be ready to try some harder problems next week. Marcus knelt beside his daughter, studying the worksheet she had completed independently. The problems were indeed challenging for a first grader, but Emma had solved them with confidence and accuracy. Her reading book was significantly above grade level, yet she was comprehending and enjoying the story. "Emma, sweetheart, tell me about school today. Did anything unusual happen?" Emma's expression grew thoughtful. "Peterson seemed upset when I finished my work early and asked for something harder. She said I should slow down and focus on being more careful, but I was being careful. I just finished fast because it wasn't very hard." The conversation confirmed what Marcus had suspected during the school meeting. Emma's progress was being interpreted as problematic behavior rather than academic growth. Her teachers, constrained by their previous assessments and institutional expectations, couldn't recognize genuine improvement when they saw it. That evening, Marcus called Sarah to describe the school meeting and its concerning recommendations. Sarah listened with the analytical focus that characterized her approach to complex problems, asking clarifying questions that revealed the depth of institutional resistance they were facing. "This is bigger than just Emma," Sarah observed. "The system has invested significant resources in assessing and categorizing her. Admitting they were wrong about her capabilities would challenge their expertise and potentially require them to reconsider other students they've similarly labeled." Marcus felt the tactical situation crystallizing. "So we're not just fighting for Emma's education. We're challenging an entire institutional framework that depends on maintaining its authority." The stakes were becoming clear. If they succeeded in proving Emma's true capabilities, they would validate an approach that could help countless other children who had been written off by traditional assessment methods. If they failed, Emma would be relegated to a special education track that would limit her potential for years to come. Sarah proposed a strategy that reflected her military training background. "We need to build an undeniable case that documents Emma's actual abilities under optimal learning conditions. Then we present evidence that's so compelling they can't ignore it." Over the following weeks, Marcus and Sarah developed a comprehensive documentation system that tracked Emma's progress across multiple domains. They video recorded her solving complex problems, documented her reading comprehension at various grade levels, and created portfolios of her creative work that demonstrated advanced thinking skills. The evidence they assembled painted a picture of a highly capable child who had been dramatically underestimated by conventional assessment methods. Emma could perform multiplication and division when concepts were presented through manipulatives and visual models. She could read and comprehend texts that were supposedly beyond her abilities when given appropriate scaffolding and support. Most significantly, she demonstrated problem-solving skills that often exceeded those of children several grades ahead of her. But gathering evidence was only the first phase of their campaign. The real challenge would be convincing school officials to reconsider their professional judgment and acknowledge that their assessments had been fundamentally flawed. Marcus scheduled another meeting with the school team, this time bringing Sarah as an educational consultant. He knew they would face skepticism about Sarah's qualifications, but her systematic documentation and military training methodology provided credibility that pure parental advocacy could not achieve. The preparation for this meeting felt like planning a critical military operation. They anticipated every possible objection, prepared responses to likely counter-arguments, and organized their evidence for maximum impact. Marcus understood that they would have one opportunity to present their case effectively, and failure would likely result in Emma being placed in special education, regardless of her actual abilities. The night before the meeting, Marcus sat with Emma as she completed homework that would have challenged many third graders. She worked with quiet concentration, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that revealed the depth of her understanding. This was the child the school system had labeled as cognitively limited, the little girl whose future they wanted to constrain based on flawed assessments. "Daddy," Emma said as he tucked her into bed, "why do some people think I'm not smart?" The question pierced through all of Marcus's military composure. Some people have trouble seeing what makes different children special, but that doesn't mean you're not smart. It means they haven't learned how to recognize your kind of intelligence yet. Emma nodded with the wisdom that often surprised adults. Sarah says everyone's brain works differently, and that's what makes people interesting. As Marcus prepared for the battle ahead, he realized this fight was about much more than his daughter's educational placement. It was about challenging a system that too quickly limited children's potential based on narrow definitions of ability. It was about proving that with the right approach and unwavering belief, children could exceed every expectation placed upon them. Tomorrow would determine whether their unconventional alliance could prevail against institutional resistance and professional skepticism. The odds seemed overwhelming, but Marcus had never backed down from an impossible mission, and he wasn't about to start when his daughter's future hung in the balance. The conference room felt different when Marcus and Sarah arrived for the crucial meeting. The same institutional beige walls and fluorescent lighting that had witnessed Emma's educational fate being decided once before now posted a confrontation that would determine whether one little girl's potential would be recognized or permanently constrained by systemic limitations. Dr. Morrison sat at her familiar position at the head of the table, flanked by the same team of educators who had previously diagnosed Emma's cognitive limitations. Their body language conveyed polite skepticism mixed with professional obligation. They were clearly prepared to listen respectfully before implementing their predetermined special education placement. Marcus had requested permission to bring an educational consultant, describing Sarah only as someone with relevant training experience. He hadn't mentioned her military background or nursing career, understanding that institutional bias might dismiss her expertise before she had a chance to present their findings. "Thank you for accommodating this additional meeting," Marcus began with military precision. "I'd like to present some recent observations about Emma's learning progress that I believe warrant reconsideration of her educational placement."
Dr.
Morrison nodded with practiced patience. "Of course, Mr. Timepierre. Thompson, we're always interested in parental observations, though I should mention that our assessment protocols are quite comprehensive and rarely require modification based on home performance." Sarah stepped forward with a professional confidence that commanded attention despite her youth. "I'm Sarah Martinez, and I've been working with Emma on learning strategies adapted from military training methodologies. What we've discovered challenges some fundamental assumptions about her cognitive capabilities." The mention of military training methodology sparked unexpected interest around the table. Mrs. Peterson leaned forward slightly, while the special education coordinator made notes on her legal pad. Military precision was something these educators could respect, even if they weren't sure how it applied to childhood learning differences. Sarah opened her laptop and connected it to the room's projection system with the efficiency that marked all her actions. "I'd like to share some documentation of Emma's performance under optimal learning conditions, then discuss how these findings might inform her educational planning." The first video showed Emma working through multiplication problems using colored manipulatives. The same child who had been assessed as having significant cognitive delays was demonstrating mathematical reasoning that exceeded grade-level expectations. She grouped objects systematically, recognized patterns intuitively, and explained her thinking with clarity that revealed deep conceptual understanding. "This was recorded 3 weeks ago," Sarah explained as Emma's voice filled the room, confidently describing how she had solved 8x6 by creating groups of 8 objects and counting them 6 times. Emma completed 12 multiplication problems with 92% accuracy. Dr. Morrison shifted in her chair, her professional composure beginning to show cracks. "Mr. Perry, Thompson, has Emma been receiving tutoring in multiplication? Because our assessments clearly indicated she struggles with basic addition facts." Marcus remained calm despite feeling vindicated by the obvious impact their evidence was having. "Emma has received no formal tutoring in multiplication. Sarah has been working with her on learning strategies that help her access her existing mathematical understanding." The next video was even more compelling. Emma sat with a chapter book that was officially 3 grade levels above her assessed reading ability, discussing the story with sophisticated comprehension that included making predictions, identifying character motivations, and connecting plot elements to her own experiences.
"I don't understand how this is possible. Mrs. D,"
Peterson whispered, more to herself than to the room. "Emma can barely decode first-grade passages during our classroom assessments." Sarah paused the video and turned to address the group directly. "That's exactly the question we need to explore. Why does Emma struggle with simple tasks in traditional testing situations, but excel with complex concepts when learning conditions are optimized for her specific cognitive style?" The room fell silent as the implications of Sarah's question settled over the assembled educators. They were being asked to consider that their assessment methods might be fundamentally flawed, that a child they had labeled as disabled might actually be highly capable but misunderstood. Sarah continued with systematic precision. In military training, we learned that assessment must match the conditions under which performance is expected. If we want soldiers to perform under stress, we test them under stress. If we want them to work collaboratively, we assess collaborative skills. Emma's testing was conducted under conditions that actively interfered with her ability to demonstrate her capabilities. She clicked to the next slide, which outlined the specific environmental and instructional modifications that had enabled Emma's success. Reduced time pressure, multi-sensory presentation of information, opportunities for physical movement during learning, and confidence-building feedback had transformed Emma from a struggling student into an engaged and successful learner. Are you suggesting that our professional assessment protocols are inadequate? Dr. Morrison asked, her tone carrying both curiosity and defensiveness. Marcus recognized the critical moment in their presentation. We're suggesting that Emma represents a type of learner whose abilities are masked by traditional assessment methods. She's not disabled, she's differently abled in ways that require adaptive instructional approaches. Sarah supported his statement with data that demonstrated Emma's progress across multiple academic domains. Reading comprehension had improved by 2 grade levels. Mathematical reasoning had advanced from basic counting to multi-step problem solving. Writing skills had developed from reluctant sentence construction to enthusiastic storytelling. The special education coordinator, Miss Choice, and coordinator, Ms. B. Williams, raised an obvious concern. Even if Emma can perform at higher levels under specialized conditions, our classroom environments can't be individualized to this extent for every student who struggles with traditional instruction. The objection revealed the heart of institutional resistance. Acknowledging Emma's true capabilities would require admitting that other children might also be misunderstood and poorly served by current practices. The implications extended far beyond one student's educational placement. Sarah had anticipated this concern and was prepared with a response that reflected her understanding of systematic change. You're absolutely right that individual customization isn't practical for every student. But what if we identified the specific environmental and instructional modifications that enable success for learners like Emma, then implemented those strategies systematically? She presented research on universal design for learning, military training adaptations that had improved outcomes across diverse populations, and case studies of schools that had successfully modified their approaches to serve students with different cognitive styles. The techniques that help Emma learn more effectively would likely benefit many students who don't have formal learning differences, Sarah explained. Multisensory instruction, reduced time pressure, and confidence-building feedback are good teaching practices that support all learners. Marcus watched the educators processing this information, seeing professional curiosity beginning to overcome institutional resistance. Mrs. Peterson was taking detailed notes, while the assistant principal was asking questions about implementation strategies. Dr. Morrison remained skeptical but engaged. This is certainly interesting, but changing Emma's educational placement based on home performance rather than standardized assessments would set a concerning precedent. How do we know these results would transfer to a classroom environment? Sarah had saved their most compelling evidence for this moment. We've already tested that hypothesis. Emma has been successfully completing advanced work in her current classroom when given appropriate supports. Mrs. Peterson has documented improvements in her participation and performance over the past month. All eyes turned to Mrs. Peterson, who looked distinctly uncomfortable being put on the spot. After a long pause, she admitted what everyone in the room was beginning to realize. Emma has been different lately. More engaged, more confident, completing work that I thought was beyond her abilities. I assumed she was receiving outside tutoring that was pushing her too hard. The admission shifted the dynamic in the room. Emma's progress wasn't just theoretical documentation. It was being validated by the very teacher who had previously recommended special education placement. Marcus pressed their advantage with strategic timing. We're requesting that Emma be given the opportunity to remain in general education with appropriate accommodations and supports. We believe she can succeed in an age-appropriate curriculum if her learning differences are recognized and addressed rather than seen as deficits. The request sparked intense discussion among the educators. They were being asked to reverse a decision based on comprehensive professional assessment, yet the evidence before them was undeniably compelling. Emma's documented progress challenged fundamental assumptions about cognitive assessment and educational placement. Morrison called for a brief recess to allow the team to discuss the situation privately. As Marcus and Sarah waited in the hallway, they could hear the muffled sounds of heated debate coming from the conference room. Professional reputations and institutional practices were being questioned by the success of one little girl who had exceeded every limitation placed upon her. When they were called back into the room, the atmosphere had changed perceptibly. The adversarial positioning had been replaced by collaborative problem-solving energy. Dr. Morrison spoke with careful professionalism, but her tone indicated a willingness to consider alternatives. "We're prepared to offer a compromise," she began. "Emma can remain in general education with intensive supports and accommodations. However, she'll need to demonstrate sustained progress through formal assessments to maintain this placement." Sarah recognized both the opportunity and the trap in this offer. They were being given a chance to prove Emma's capabilities, but under conditions that might still set her up for failure if the assessments didn't match her learning style. "We appreciate the opportunity," Sarah responded diplomatically. "However, we'd like to propose that Emma's progress be measured using multiple assessment methods, including performance-based evaluations that better capture her actual abilities." The negotiation continued for another hour as they worked out the specific details of Emma's educational plan. Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful military operation as they secured accommodations that would allow Emma to demonstrate her true potential while remaining in an appropriately challenging academic environment. But their victory was provisional. Emma would need to prove herself continuously under the scrutiny of professionals who remained skeptical about her abilities. The real test would come in the classroom, where she would need to demonstrate that her progress was sustainable and transferable to traditional educational settings. As they left the meeting, Sarah turned to Marcus with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "We won the battle, but the war is just beginning. Emma's going to face constant pressure to prove she belongs in general education." Marcus nodded, understanding the challenges ahead while feeling hopeful for the first time in months. "Emma's stronger than any of them realize. If anyone can prove that children can exceed every limitation placed upon them, it's her." They had successfully challenged institutional wisdom and secured an opportunity for Emma to demonstrate her true potential. Now came the most crucial phase, proving that their unconventional approach could produce sustained success in a traditional educational environment. The stakes couldn't be higher, because failure would not only impact Emma's future, but potentially discredit their methodology and limit opportunities for other misunderstood children. The decisive campaign had been won, but the ultimate victory would be determined by Emma's performance in the weeks and months ahead. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood at the back of Emma's classroom during the spring academic showcase, watching his daughter confidently present a science project to a room full of parents, teachers, and administrators. The transformation was so complete that newcomers would never suspect this poised 7-year-old had once been labeled as cognitively limited and recommended for special education placement. Emma stood beside her project on marine ecosystems, fielding questions from curious adults with the enthusiasm of a child who had rediscovered the joy of learning. Her presentation demonstrated not only great appropriate knowledge, but sophisticated understanding of complex environmental relationships that impressed even the most skeptical observers. "The coral reef depends on symbiotic relationships," Emma explained to Dr. Morrison, who had stopped by the display with obvious curiosity. "That means different species help each other survive. When the water gets too warm from climate change, the coral gets stressed and loses its algae partners, which turns it white. That's called coral bleaching." Dr. Morrison nodded appreciatively, making notes on her evaluation form. The school psychologist who had once documented Emma's cognitive deficits was now witnessing academic performance that exceeded expectations for children 2 grade levels ahead. The journey to this moment had been neither smooth nor simple. Emma's first few weeks back in general education had been rocky, with both teacher and student struggling to adjust to new expectations and approaches. Mrs. Peterson, despite her growing recognition of Emma's capabilities, initially remained cautious about pushing a child she had previously seen as fragile and limited. Sarah had worked closely with the school team to implement the environmental and instructional modifications that enabled Emma's success. Seating arrangements were adjusted to minimize distractions. Assignment formats were modified to accommodate Emma's learning style. Most importantly, assessment methods were diversified to capture Emma's knowledge through multiple modalities, rather than relying solely on traditional paper and pencil tests. The changes benefited not only Emma, but several other students in the class who also struggled with conventional instructional approaches. Mrs. Peterson found that providing visual organizers, reducing time pressure, and incorporating movement into lessons improved engagement and performance across her entire classroom population. "I never realized how many children were being underserved by our standard practices," Mrs. Peterson had confided to Marcus during a parent conference. Emma's situation opened my eyes to the possibility that we might be missing potential in other students as well. The ripple effects extended beyond Emma's immediate classroom. Sarah had been invited to present their methodology to the school district's special education department, sharing strategies that were being pilot tested with other students who had been identified as having learning disabilities. Early results suggested that many children labeled as cognitively limited might actually be capable of much more when provided appropriate supports and accommodations. Emma's academic progress had been dramatic and sustained. Her reading level had advanced by 3 grades within 6 months. Mathematical reasoning skills had developed to the point where she was working with concepts typically introduced in 4th grade. Most significantly, her confidence had blossomed in ways that affected every aspect of her school experience. The little girl who had once asked her father if she was stupid now volunteered to help struggling classmates with their assignments. She participated enthusiastically in classroom discussions, asked thoughtful questions that challenged her teacher's thinking, and approached new learning challenges with excitement rather than anxiety. But perhaps the most profound change was in Emma's self-perception. She had developed a clear understanding that people learn differently, and that her learning style was simply one of many valid approaches to acquiring knowledge. This insight had given her resilience when faced with difficult tasks and empathy for others who struggled with academic challenges. Marcus documented every milestone with the systematic precision that characterized all his projects. Emma's portfolio included academic work samples, teacher evaluations, standardized test scores, and video recordings of her presentations and problem-solving sessions. The evidence painted an undeniable picture of a highly capable student who had been dramatically underestimated by initial assessments. Sarah had been promoted to head nurse in the pediatric unit and was pursuing additional certification in educational consultation. Her experience with Emma had sparked an interest in the intersection between healthcare and learning differences, leading to collaborative projects that identified children whose academic struggles might be related to undiagnosed medical conditions.
Emma changed my understanding of what's possible, Sarah reflected during one of their regular check-in meetings.
She taught me that labels can become limitations if we let them, but they can also be starting points for discovering new approaches to help children succeed. The success story had attracted attention from educational researchers and military training specialists interested in the applications of adaptive instructional methodology. Marcus and Sarah had been invited to present their approach at conferences and had collaborated on several published articles describing the strategies that had enabled Emma's transformation. But beyond the professional recognition and systemic implications, the most meaningful outcome was evident in Emma's daily experience. She approached school with enthusiasm, tackled challenges with confidence, and maintained friendships with children who valued her unique perspectives and creative problem-solving abilities. The Spring Academic Showcase represented a culmination of their journey, but also a new beginning. Emma's success had proven that children could exceed every limitation placed upon them when adults refused to accept deficit-based thinking and worked creatively to identify effective approaches. As the showcase concluded, Marcus found himself in conversation with other parents whose children were struggling with similar challenges. Word had spread about Emma's transformation, and families were seeking guidance about advocating for their own children, who might be misunderstood by traditional assessment methods. The key is refusing to accept that your child's struggles represent permanent limitations, Marcus told a mother, whose son had been recommended for special education placement. Sometimes the problem isn't with the child, it's with the approach being used to help them learn. Sarah joined the conversation, offering practical strategies that other families could implement to support their children's learning differences. The informal consultation had become a regular part of their community involvement, as they shared their methodology with anyone who might benefit from alternative approaches to childhood education. Dr. Morrison approached as the crowd began to thin, her expression reflecting the complex emotions of a professional whose expertise had been challenged and ultimately expanded by Emma's success. "I owe you an apology," she said to Marcus and Sarah. "My initial assessments were based on the best practices available at the time, but Emma has taught me that our understanding of learning differences needs to evolve. She's changed how I approach other children who struggle with traditional educational methods." The acknowledgement represented more than personal vindication. It signified institutional recognition that their approach had validity and potential for broader application. Dr. Approach. Morrison's willingness to reconsider established practices opened possibilities for other children who might benefit from similar interventions. As they walked to the parking lot together, Emma skipped ahead with the carefree energy of a child who had reclaimed her joy in learning. She turned back to her father and Sarah with a smile that could have illuminated the entire naval base. "Can we work on my science fair project this weekend?" she asked with the enthusiasm that now characterized her approach to academic challenges. I want to study how different learning styles affect problem-solving strategies. Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances, recognizing that Emma had internalized the lessons that had transformed her educational experience. She understood that diversity in thinking and learning was a strength rather than a limitation, and she was eager to share that understanding with others. The little girl who had once been deemed disabled by professional assessments was now planning research projects that could help other children discover their own potential. She had become living proof that when adults refused to accept limiting labels and worked together creatively, children could achieve outcomes that exceeded every expectation. Their journey had begun with a desperate father seeking help for his struggling daughter, and a rookie nurse with unconventional training background. It had evolved into a partnership that challenged institutional thinking, validated alternative approaches to learning differences, and most importantly, restored a brilliant child's confidence in her own abilities. Emma's transformation was complete, but her story was just beginning. Armed with self-awareness, academic skills, and unwavering family support, she was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, with the confidence that comes from knowing that perceived limitations are often just opportunities for creative solutions. As Marcus watched his daughter disappear into the school building the following Monday morning, her backpack bouncing with each confident step, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The military commander who had once felt helpless watching his child struggle had discovered that the most important battles are often fought in classrooms rather than combat zones, and that sometimes the most significant victories come from refusing to surrender a child's potential to systemic limitations. Emma Thompson, the SEAL commander's daughter who had been deemed disabled, had proven that with the right approach, unwavering belief, and military precision determination, any child could overcome the labels placed upon them and achieve greatness beyond anyone's imagination. Her success had become a beacon of hope for families facing similar challenges and a catalyst for educational approaches that recognize potential rather than focusing on deficits. The rookie nurse's military methods had indeed made all the difference, not because they were magical solutions, but because they represented a fundamental shift in thinking about children's capabilities and the approaches needed to help them succeed. Emma's story had become a testament to the power of refusing to accept limitations and the extraordinary outcomes possible when adults work together with creativity, determination, and absolute belief in a child's potential.